First, I want to make sure to wish you all a good morning. This is the regulatory, how to avoid regulatory speed bumps session. We are very fortunate to have a couple of co-sponsors, DECO and BioSafe Systems. It's really important to kind of highlight that because those are the folks, along with OPN and Western Growers, that make this all possible. So make sure you stop by their booths, say thanks. It's a really important part of this whole machine here. I have to mention a bunch of housekeeping things, so I want to get it right, so I'm going to read this part. This session, along with all OGS educational sessions, are being audio recorded and will be available at the OGS website later next week. In the back of the room, there's a table with signups for Certified Crop Advisor, CEUs. Make sure to sign up on that sheet or scan the code at the end of the session. And then the favorite, please silence your cell phones if you haven't already. Let's get going. I'd like to welcome you all to this session. It's one of two sessions starting the day. The more lighter-hearted tagline for this is avoiding regulatory speed bumps. The less lighthearted introduction is there's new regulations coming, and they're probably going to affect you all to some degree in this room at some point. We're going to use a lot of acronyms here, so I'll lay it out first. Strengthening Organic Enforcement, or SOE. Most of the panelists, and I will default probably pretty quickly to just calling it SOE. In a nutshell, it is the largest revision to organic regulations since the regulations were first put forward in 2000, full implementation in 2002. So a good 20-year history under this current structure. This is the largest revision to that since that origin. I'm going to do a very brief introduction for the panelists as a whole, and if they want to build on that, certainly welcome to. But then we'll move pretty a little short, 8 or 10 minutes apiece from each. We'll have some time for further questions afterward. First up, they've conveniently, very highly disciplined group here, arranged themselves in sequential order for you. First up, we have Emily Musgrave, the Organic Regulatory Manager at Driscoll's. 8 years experience there in organic compliance, also deals with sustainability initiatives. Daily work revolves around organic regulations, working with organic growers in the field practices, public policy, advocacy, and in her spare time, building rapport with government agencies. Next up will be Connie Carr, Certification Director for Oregon Tilth, that I first met over 20 years ago, actually, and which coincides with her 2 decades of experience in certification, particularly international standards and processing, specializing in solving certification challenges. Some of you may be aware of these certification challenges. And her team is bunch of dedicated individuals to hold organic integrity in the highest regard. Next up will be Jake Evans, owner and founder of True Organic Products, family-owned, operated business based here in California. Launched approximately 20 years ago, became the largest manufacturer of organic fertilizer on the West Coast. Been in the business since the 90s and is quite passionate about supporting organic crop production and particularly the integrity of the seal. Next up will be Robert Yang. He's the Director for Accreditation of the USDA National Organic Program. And prior to that, actually served as in organic certification with Pennsylvania Certified Organic, both in the field and in management. Last up, batting cleanup, will be Tom Chapman. He's the CEO and Executive Director of the Organic Trade Association. I think I've known Tom about 20 plus years also, back when he was in organic certification, dealing with a lot of international standards, which, as you'll see, becomes more and more relevant under SOE, or Strengthening Organic Enforcement. And then did quite a few number of years with Numi Tea, Cliff Bar, and other companies in supply chain management. So any kind of housekeeping questions before we start? I'm going to kind of hold, if we can, we'll run through approximately somewhere in the neighborhood of 45, 50 minutes in total from the panel, and then we should have something close to half an hour for question and answers. So if there's a point of clarification you'd like to make midstream, that's okay. But any significant discussion we'll kind of hold to the end of the session, if that's all right. So first up, let me do one little off-the-cuff thing here. One of the conversations we started having last night was, what ties this room together? And sorry about that. My experience comes from, I should probably say, as your moderator, I'm John Foster. I'm not very good at selling myself. So I work with Wolf & Associates. I'm their chief operating officer now. I first started working with Bill Wolf, the founder, in 2004, the first project we worked on together. And then I have since come in and out of working with him since then. I have been in the organic industry since 1994. I did 10 or 12 years as an inspector, technical reviewer, certification director, executive director, supply chain, QA, lots of fun things along the way. But what's been interesting for me is that there's always been more that binds us than tears us apart. Although what's in the news is often the more sexy, what are the differences? Who's more angry? Who's more angsty? And I've always found that the organic community, for the most part, is one of the most welcoming and embracing and most inclusive subsets of the population. And it's why I've stayed in it for as long as I have. It's really all about the people for me. The relationships I've gotten to form over decades now are the most cherished I have, along with family, of course. But so I see several familiar faces in the room, and I see name tags that I've seen in the business for a long, long time. And it's got to be something special about this industry in order to keep us all involved. So I find it, I really cherish this community. It is one of the few angles, the few things I can think of that is both progressive and conservative at the same time, the organic space. I'm not talking just about politics here, actually. I'm not. It is very progressive in nature, but it is also very focused on conservation. And there aren't many other things that we come across in our daily experience that we can say that about. So I'd like to kind of think about that. How is, as we're kind of talking and as you're thinking in the audience, how are we progressive? How are we preserving? How are we conserving for future generations? Think about that in the context of a regulatory, right, or the thing that we're going to really focus on is regulatory change around compliance and enforcement. But compliance and enforcement is there to preserve organic integrity. And organic integrity, no secret to this room, starts in the field, right? It starts with the seed, starts with the soil. So there's a method to the madness here of a fairly large panel, because the diversity of opinions is pretty vast in the organic community. The diversity of perspectives is pretty vast, but it was very important to make sure that all of those, again, back to the inclusiveness of the organic space, it's very important to include all of those perspectives. So as you're listening, think about, if you will, please think about how these regulations reflect a dedication, a commitment to organic integrity. And as we start talking, it'll become clear, I think, why organic integrity is at the core of enforcement, actually. So with that, let me ask Emily to get us started. And then take notes, if you will. If there's something really you need clarified, let me know, and I'll try and do that in the course of the progression. Emily.
All right. Can you guys hear me okay? All right. Well, welcome everybody. Thanks, John, for the intro. Yeah, my name is Emily Musgrave. I'm the Organic Regulatory Manager at Driscoll's. And for those of you that don't know, we grow berries, organic and conventional, raspberries, blueberries, blackberries, and strawberries. So this is really exciting to see you all. I'm really happy to be here, and I've been at OGS for quite some time, but never been on a panel before, so super humbled and privileged to be up here with this group of talented individuals up here. So I'm going to dive right in because, as John alluded to, we're getting into the weeds of one of the biggest changes to the organic regulations that's ever occurred. Pretty big deal, so hopefully some of you that are policy wonks out there can appreciate this. Before I get into the proposed rule, though, John and I must have been on the same page because I did want to mention really what SOE and the proposed rule is and kind of what we're all here to talk about truly is organic integrity, right? Maintaining organic integrity starts in the nursery. It starts with the growers. It goes all the way through from the field all the way to that consumer that's buying the organic product. So that's really going to be a theme that's tied into this whole talk. And before I dive into that, though, I really just wanted to give a big shout out to all the growers in this room. I mean, truly, we would not be here without you. You guys are rock stars. We all know how, I mean, growing is so rewarding, but there's a lot of challenges. So really wanted to say that, to appreciate the growers. If you're at lunch today with your grower friend, give them a fist bump, tell them how much you appreciate them, because we really would not be here without you. And now that I've said that little celebratory piece, we're going to go into some of the changes to the regs. You know, that might be a little bit of a challenge for some of you growers out there, but hang in there with us. We're going to try to break it down so that you guys aren't overwhelmed. All right, so change. I feel like we're going to be talking about change a lot during this talk, so hopefully you guys are okay with that. But we did say that this is the biggest change to the organic regulations since the final rule was published in 2002. We're really not overstating that, so this is a pretty big deal, right? Okay, now that being said, we do know that change is hard and it can be scary, right? But we all also know that change is an inevitable part of life, right? We need to morph and change. So the final rule of the organic regulation came out in 2002. Now, I just want you guys to think about this for a second. What were you guys doing in 2002? This kind of, I was thinking about this last night, right? Probably a lot of different things than you are doing now, and probably a lot has changed since 2002, right? You know, in 2002, I was a sophomore in high school, so thank God I don't still have a huge crush on the guy from Boy Meets World. So a lot has changed since then. So, and I say that to then put this in perspective, right? So 20 years later, the organic industry has changed a lot since the final rule has published, right? And also think about this. When organics started, I mean, in the 70s, it's a grass movement, right? It was a grassroots movement. It was small. I think a lot of people never imagined it would get to where it is now. I think, you know, they thought it was a fad. What are the latest thing these hippies are doing? Well, clearly, it's not a fad, obviously, right? Because I think, if I'm not mistaken, in the US, the organic industry, our sales are now at $63 billion. That's pretty amazing. All right, so that's the backstory there, right? So why now are there major changes to the organic regulation? Well, because the industry has evolved since 2002, and I think we can all agree you want standards to morph and change with your evolving industry, right? You want standards that are keeping up with the changes in technology. You want standards that are robust to make sure, you know, there's a lot of good things that technology has done, but they've also enabled some of the bad actors, right? So you want standards that can really, you know, enforce and catch those bad actors. So really, that's what SOE is built in to do, to protect organic integrity through the entire supply chain. Now, there's kind of 4 buckets of, if you will, of SOE, and I'm going to talk about just one of them, but the 4 buckets really are strengthening control systems, improving organic import oversight, clarifying organic certification standards, and enhancing supply chain traceability. So I am going to focus on import certificates because I have a feeling that there's lots of folks in the audience that this is of great importance to. All right, so what is an NOP import certificate? So an NOP import certificate is really any type of transaction document, a control document that talks about the quantity of the product being imported, and the purpose is to really document organic status. And an NOP import certificate is issued by your organic certifier. Okay, so currently, USDA AMS does not require an import certificate from countries that the US does not have an equivalency agreement with. So the US has an organic equivalency agreement with 7 countries, so that's EU, UK, Switzerland, Japan, South Korea, and Canada. So imports to the US from all those countries must be accompanied by an NOP import certificate, or in Canada, it's called an attestation statement. So if you are not importing for one of those countries above, you do not need an NOP import certificate. Now here comes the change. All right, so the proposed rule will make it mandatory that all organic products that will be sold or labeled or represented as organic in the US be accompanied by an NOP import certificate, regardless of the country of origin. All right, so I'm going to say that one again, just for clarification here. So the proposed rule will require an NOP import certificate for all organic product entering the US, regardless of where that product came from. So, all right, a big one for many people in this room is going to be our neighbor, Mexico, right? So currently, product coming from Mexico to the US does not need an import certificate. When this proposed rule comes out, organic product coming from Mexico into the US will need an import certificate. Now, what AMS is proposing to do for these import certificates is they're going to be a standardized electronic format through US Customs and Border Protection. They're going to use CBP's Automated Commercial Environment System, known as ACE, to track and store the certificates. Another important point about these NOP certificates is that the certifying agent must review them and determine whether the shipment complies with organic regulations, and they're going to have 30 calendar days of receipt of the shipment in order to do that. Okay, so I just said quite a few things there, and I only focused on one bucket, right, of this strengthening organic enforcement rule. There's a lot of other changes and things here. Don't panic about that, right? There's still a lot of time for you guys to really dive into this and figure out where you fit in. So I just gave you guys a lot of information, but now what I kind of want to just focus on before I turn it over to my colleagues up here is next steps. So the next steps I would recommend for everybody, and this is if import certificates are going to affect you, or any other parts of the regulations, really start looking at the SOE proposed rule and figure out where your company and business fits in here, right? Like I said, there's a lot of we'll touch on a lot of different points that are going to be changing. So, and it's long. If you go to the AMS website and look at the SOE proposed rule, you're like, oh my God, this thing is, I don't know how many total pages it is, but it's long. But you can just break it up, right? Break it up in sections. Look at this one section. Does this affect me? Look at import certificates. There's a change to non-retail containers. Look at every section and really figure out, is this going to change? What do we need to do in our business with this, right? For import certificates specifically, if you're certified organic, my best advice is start talking to your certifier and start talking to them now. Do not wait on that. Really start, lay out, what your imports are. Really work with your certifier. They're going to be your best resource here. They're really going to be a big help. The other thing is, if you know any organic consultants or, resources in the organic community, reach out to them. Please do that. And the other biggest thing I want to emphasize on this is really be proactive. We all procrastinate. I did it last night. I have to admit, I'm working on this last night. We all procrastinate, but don't do that with this. I think it's going to be a much more challenging hurdle to overcome if you wait. Really take it in small pieces, and then I think it's going to be easier to digest them for you. And that's kind of it. I mean, one thing to mention, and the rest of the group will follow on this, is that this is a proposed rule, right? It has not gone through, it is not a rule yet. It's currently, I believe, still in the Office of Management and Budget, OMB, so it's in a little bit of a holding pattern. I won't steal the thunder of our certification folks and NOP folks who maybe have their crystal ball and they can tell you when they think it's gonna come out, but it has not come out yet. So we're all waiting. So whatever you find, right, this is a proposed rule. So that's why we're saying you have some time, but just don't wait. I would really recommend diving in to figure out where your company fits in on this.
So by design, my plan here, my nefarious plan was to just shock and awe you right out of the gate. And then say, and Emily started introducing this, that this is a proposed rule, but it's fairly far along the process. Office of Management and Budget, or OMB, for all regulation, any regulatory change that any federal agency wants to put through has to go through a review by OMB. And that is something of a black box, right? Once it goes to OMB, National Organic Program is hands off on that. There's no discussion of it because it's been handed to another agency. So if everything went according to plan, right? We all know how often that happens. Office of Management and Budget would have released that in the first week of November, right? That was their timeline. However, there's lots of opportunity for them to say, you know what, this is pretty significant. We need a little more time, and they've done that. So the expectation, and I will also let Robert speak to this. He's the expert on the panel, speaking to regulatory process here, but it is happening, right? It's not if, it's when. And the when has two pieces to it. When will it be announced, and how long will we all have to comply with it, right? Those are both mysteries right now. We're going to live with that mystery for a few more weeks at least. But when it comes, there's no question about having to comply. This is not going to be, best example I can think of is the Bioterrorism Act. Remember that many, many years ago? Still on the books, not enforced. That's not going to happen here. This will be enforced because Congress mandated it to be so. It's going to happen. So with that, and Emily, thank you for kind of bridging that space from the grower kind of perspective and cautions to certifiers. Almost by design, the next speaker, Connie Carr, is speaking about from a certification perspective and some of the preparations that community is getting going. Connie?
Good morning. Sound okay? Everybody hear me okay? Awesome. So 25 years ago, I started in organic certification. And one of my first projects that I was assigned when I first walked in the door was to stand by a fax machine and send out advocacy notices because there was this new thing called the National Organic Standards coming into place. And the National Organic Standards were going to potentially allow GMO, sewage sludge, and irradiation. And I stood by that fax machine for days on days, dialing numbers and sending faxes, because that was the problem, or that was the issue that we were dealing with 25 years ago. And here we are today, just about to finalize one of the biggest updates to those standards that we were developing 20 years ago. And it's a pretty exciting time. It's a very positive thing for the entire industry. And I wanted to say that because I know, change is scary, like Emily was saying. And change was scary 25 years ago when we were trying to adopt the national standards, and we were scared that they were going to allow GMOs. So change is scary, but we're here to help. And I'm a real nuts and bolts kind of a person, so I just get right down to the business. So get your pencils out because I am going to tell you all sorts of things that the SOE will impact you all on. So I also put it into 4 buckets. Isn't that funny? My buckets are very similar to Emily's, but a little bit different. So the first one I'm going to talk about that really impacts the trade and is probably one of the biggest changes in the 20 years is exemptions. So currently in the regulations, there is an allowance for people or organizations that do not physically touch a product, but in the act of selling, trading, brokering product, but they may not take possession of it or may not actually change it. Currently, they're not all required to be certified. And that's about to change. And that's a big one. So we're talking hundreds and hundreds, possibly thousands of organizations and companies out there that previously have not had to be certified, that are part of the supply chain, that will be required to be certified. There's a couple things we don't know about yet in that proposed rule. Some of the questions that came up were, are transportation companies going to have to be certified? And what about brand owners? Somebody who owns a brand, has a product packed into a box, well, they have to be certified. And we're still waiting for the final rule to come out to be able to determine that. But again, this is a substantial change, really closing those loopholes within the supply chain and requiring that certification. The next bucket is that import and supply chain. And Emily so well covered the import certificate, so I'm not going to go over into details with that. Import certificates is a big part of that. And all countries, regardless of where it's coming from, will have to have an NOP import certificate issued. And there's a lot of fear around that, especially from Mexico. There's transactions and there is sales crossing the border all the time. So how are certifiers going to keep up with that? And how are producers and buyers going to manage that on a weekly, monthly basis with so much supply? So there is currently a working group of certifiers and the USDA working on developing that and working through some of those challenges and making it accessible for growers and reasonable for certifiers to manage as well. So more to come with that. Another one in the imports and supply chain is they're updating language around record keeping and the OSP that's requiring an evaluation of your supply chain. And actually a risk-based evaluation, or you might consider it a more common thing like a fraud prevention plan maybe. So proactively monitoring your supply chain to mitigate fraud. And that's a new requirement. It also adds in very clear direction that certifiers are to share information on investigations. So right now, as certifiers, we work together, but there's still this like, I don't know if I can share this information, this is confidential, and so it's actually writing into the regulation that certifiers need to share information, and they need to work together on doing these investigations. Third bucket of mine is called the new standards. Two new standard set coming out in this that I think would be relevant for this audience. One is grower group certification. And so currently grower groups are certified. However, in the national regulations, it's not clear the process or the protocol that grower groups have to establish. So now actually in the regulations will be very similar to what the National Organic Standards Board recommendations for certifying grower groups have been. And it'll address the internal control systems and processes for certifying grower groups. And that will add consistency across all certifiers. The other one this group might want to be aware of is the change in labeling for non-retail containers. How many people pack in non-retail containers in here? Raise your hand. Mm-hmm. Lots, yeah. So your labels may need to be changed, and now's a good time to talk to your certifier about what may need to be changed. So currently on non-retail containers, the only requirement is the lot code, if applicable. They're actually changing that to require the certifier identification on that label, as well as required to say the organic designation, or 100% organic, et cetera, and the traceability information, lot code, et cetera. So your labels may need to be updated and changed. My last bucket is in certification realm, and that's just where I love to live. And there's a lot of changes in there, oh boy, but I'm just gonna highlight a couple that may be applicable for this group. One update is the on-site inspection requirements for traceability and mass balance audits. Now, that has been a very regular practice with certifiers, but it's actually being written into the regulation for certifier consistency, that traceability and mass balance has to occur during the inspection. So this may increase your inspection time. It's also requiring that certifiers themselves do a risk-based supply chain audit. So potentially random, risk-based, high risk, we just call up and ask for the audit documentation. And that's going to seriously increase the need for resources for certifiers. It's also requiring additional training for certification staff. So inspectors and certification decision makers will have to have up to 20 hours of relevant training every year in order to continue to do their jobs. And so that's going to increase the expense for certifiers as well. It's a good thing. It's very positive. But all of these things I just talked about kind of give you the idea that there's a lot of additional work and resources needed for certifiers, a lot of impact on growers, and this could potentially increase certification fees down the road. And I just wanted to be open, honest, and transparent about that. How many people in this room have heard about cost share? Stand up, raise your hand. You use cost share? You applied for cost share? All right, we should see more hands in this room. So if you have not heard of cost share, if you have not applied for it, work with your certifier. It's a really great opportunity to get some of that money back that you're paying for certification, and now's the time to do it to ensure that we continue to get those funds for cost share. As we go on in the future, as certification fees increase, that may become more important and more valuable for everybody to utilize that cost share program. That's sort of my summary.
That's your deal? All right.
My deal.
Thank you, Connie.
You're welcome.
So one of the things I heard in here was increased, as a function of this change in regulation, increased communication and coordination. And this seems to be one of the hallmarks I've been observing over the last several years with the National Organic Program as a function of Farm Bill monies that were released and authorized in 2018. A significant amount of training went into recruitment and training went into NOP staff. A great deal of that into compliance and enforcement, which is the branch that will be really verifying that these changes are adequately implemented. So this is where we start now, and I really want to reinforce the idea that the compliance and enforcement here is there to protect the consumer, and it's there to ensure that organic integrity is the highest possible level, right? And this mandate essentially came from Congress in 2018. We're about to hit another Farm Bill cycle next year, 2023. And as usual, there's already starting questions to be asked from Congress. Hey, where did that money go and what are we getting for it? You know, almost 5 years ago. So the timing of all of this is not coincidental. This is by design. It may seem like a long time to get these regulations put forward, and it is, but to do them as right as our structure allows for takes time to make sure it's as equitable as possible. That equitable nature it's well intended, and as are the intentions, I think, of the grower community, the organic grower community in general. So next speaker, Jake Evans, is going to be speaking a little bit about how growers are able to create that organic integrity. In fact, the growers are the only ones in our system that can create organic integrity. Everything else that happens down the distribution chain after that just maintains it. Those are some of the measures that Connie was talking about, is maintaining organic integrity. But it all starts. It starts with the soil. It starts with the seed. And so this is one of the ways that this session was designed to be thinking, like, compliance and enforcement is important, but why is it important? And I hope that's a decent introduction for Jake Evans.
Yeah, thank you, John.
You betcha.
You know, when John talked to me about this talk today, I said, you know, I can't contribute a whole lot on SOE, just enough to be dangerous on that, but I can talk about organic integrity and what it means. You know, you all are some of the best farmers in the world. You're the most innovative, technical, hardworking, and farming in some of the most expensive, challenging, and highly regulated areas that exist. And when organic integrity is compromised, your innovation, your technical practices, your farm, your crops you produce, they're devalued. And we can't allow the organic farmer to be devalued. We cannot let the seal to be compromised. And you all know, in a lot of cases, the organic standards on the daily, it's an honor system. And, certain times folks choose to potentially not honor the standards, not think about the consequences that could exist, but it's severe consequences. If you choose to violate the standards, it's serious punishment. And we've seen the U.S., we've seen folks that choose to make that decision face prison time, substantial fines, destruction of their business and lives. It's a major issue when you do that. And sometimes you kind of wonder, why would folks do that? But I just don't think they realize the consequences. A lot of cases, there's conventional farming going on, organic farming going on. What's the big deal? The big deal is it's a serious crime. So you could kind of ask, I believe we're all responsible to ensure organic integrity is not compromised. If someone was stealing from your ranch every day, would you just allow the theft to continue to go on? Would you not do anything about it? Because the reality is when products are being sold that compete with your organic products that don't follow the organic standards, people are stealing from your ranch every single day. So what can you do about it? You may feel like you've complained and it hasn't got anywhere. You may feel like you don't know where to go if you see the seal being compromised. Well, the NOP's got a portal. There's an online complaint system in which you can remain anonymous. I kind of think of it like this. If I'm missing items in my business every day, I could talk to the authorities and say, I'm missing something. I don't know what it is. I don't know who's taking it. I don't know where it's going, but it's missing every day. I'm missing something. And the likelihood of the authorities getting much traction on that is probably limited. But if I'm very detailed, here's what I'm missing, here's who I believe is taking it, here's what time it's being taken, here's the description of what's going on, I think the authorities could get some pretty good traction. And most likely that theft would come to an end. I feel we need to treat our regulators the same way. We need to help our regulators be successful. When you see the organic seal being compromised, you need to be very detailed, very specific, very clear, very technical in how it's being compromised when reporting it to the authorities. And I know it's hard. You're farming, you're running a business, and it takes a lot of resources. But I know this, surveillance works. Lawsuits work. People know when the seal's being compromised. And everyone involved in that process, the employees, the suppliers, the consultants, they know a crime's going on when it's being committed, and they're part of that crime. When people start getting deposed, and things start to unwind, folks start to protect themselves and things start to come out. And these things with surveillance, they can be passed on to the regulators, they can be passed on to the authorities, and this can put an end to the bad actors. It takes a lot of resources, it takes a lot of investment, but how as a community can we not make that investment to protect our seal? I think internationally, the challenges are even greater. We work with some of the best international growers in the world. Their farming practices are amazing, and they face the same challenges with folks compromising the seal. In my research, unfortunately, internationally, I haven't seen any folks that choose to compromise that seal face any harsh penalties. I haven't seen any prison time internationally. I haven't seen any major fines. I've seen a loss of certification. I've seen businesses being dissolved, and I see folks walking down the road. Without major penalties, the detraction from fraud internationally, what's the reason not to do it? Most recently I saw the stats at NOP. The U.S. had 4 times the amount of revoked certifications than just the second country. And I don't know if that really paints a fair picture of our United States farmers. To me, I think internationally the tools are limited to do something about it. And this is where I believe SOE is critical, but I also believe product testing. There is specific tests. It's not one test. It's a series of tests of the crop, of the soil, of the water, of the inputs that can be very detailed and can paint a very clear picture if products meet our organic standards and are grown with the standards or not. So I'm excited about the future. It's an honor to be here and speak in front of you all today. It's all of our responsibility to maintain this seal. It's imperative of our business. We've got a great industry. We've got great consumers. And I appreciate your work, and we just need to continue to push along. Thank you all.
All right. Thank you, Jake. So again, as if by design, so what Jake is referring to is the need for enforcement. As it happens, next speaker, Robert, is here as a representative of the National Organic Program and deals with certification issues every day. So the structure, for those of you unfamiliar, so he heads up the accreditation branch. And the accreditation branch is a significant portion of the NOP that oversees all certification activity. All of it for 70-plus certifiers globally. I'll go out on a limb and bet that he would say, with respect, he needs as many resources as he can get around the world. The organic industry, we think of the organic industry here, $63 billion in revenue here. But that doesn't reflect all of the transactions of all of the supply chain features that are happening globally that feed that $63 billion. On a global base, so roughly half certification activity under NOP is in the US, a little bit, correct me in your speech, Robert, roughly half in the US and half foreign. So there's a lot of activity that happens outside of the US that Jake referenced, all of that supply chain, all of that organic integrity that starts around the world, literally around the world, ends up here. The regulation here was designed to protect the consumer and the representations made on agricultural products with an organic claim on the label. Right? So National Organic Program is nested under the Agricultural Marketing Service. The Agricultural Marketing Service under the USDA. So first and foremost, the regulation you all operate under is primarily a labeling law. And that's why if you look at the text of the regulation, the labeling section is longer than the crop production, the livestock, and the handling sections combined. It's a lot about labeling. It's all about the seal, which is Jake's, take-home message. Got to preserve the integrity of the seal. With that, I'm going to ask Robert to kind of step into that space and feel free to wing it a little bit about compliance and enforcement. I know that's not your main deal, but feel free to wing that with respect to Jake's comments if you're comfortable.
Well, thank you for the introduction, John. As we're talking about the strengthening organic enforcement rule, what comes to my memory is about 3 years ago when we started to draft the rule. Connie mentioned the draft rule that is out there right now for the producer-grower groups. It all started with 4 of us within the National Organic Program, 2 people from our standards division, myself and our lead auditor, just sitting down to start talking about, okay, what are the National Organic Standard Board recommendations that we have, and what are you actually seeing out there on the ground during your audits? What do you know that what is it that you know that our certifiers are struggling with? What are their challenges? And what are the areas that we really need to codify within the regulations because they are only recommendations at this point? And fast forward, here we are, right? 2019 at that time to 2022, and we're at the cusp. We're clearly at the cusp of putting out a final rule. And so I think if you're a certifier, if you're a producer, even if you're Tom at the Organic Trade Association, you're probably all looking to me for an answer as to when is that final rule going to be published,
When
right?
is that final rule going to be published?
Okay, he just asked the question. So as John, and I just want to touch on that because I think that is important. It is all about timing, and as Connie mentioned, emphasized, there is some time for preparation, right? And so the timing of that is very important. What I can share with you, and John has already mentioned that, it is at the Office of Management Budget. It's been there for about 90 days for their review. They are the final step in the process. So once their review is completed, there is some ongoing communication between that office and our program regarding the final language in the rule. And once that final rule is published, there is a 60-day, what we call delayed implementation date. So 60 days, Congress also has an opportunity if they want to take action against it. They have that opportunity as part of the law, the act. And after 60 days, then there's going to be an entire year, 12 months for all the operations and impacted businesses to comply or meet the requirements. So having said that, that's the overall kind of time frame for everyone here in this room to consider as to when you need to meet the requirements if it does impact you. And I can safely say, because I have confirmed this with our deputy administrator, that we are about weeks ahead of that publishing. Okay, so not months, but at this point we are weeks out here. So we are clearly at the cusp of the publishing of that final rule in the Federal Register. And again, once it's published, there's a 60-day implementation date. After 60 days, everyone has a year. Everyone who's impacted by that rule has a year to come into compliance. Okay. So hopefully that answers at least the initial question, although it's not a date at this point. Okay, but we clearly are at the final leg. And I just wanted to express appreciation to everyone here on this panel. We had over 1,500 comments once the proposed rule was out there. Back in 2020, we had a round of comments, which is the typical process. Had over 1,500 comments. All the staff in our standards division, we have one of them here today with us, reviewed the rule, reviewed all the comments, and that's how far we've come in the process. And we are clearly at the final step of that process. Okay. So, having said that, all right. So maybe I've let that out of the bag, and everyone can just take a breath. But having said that, I do want to, I guess the messaging that I can also share with you today, which has been voiced by the other panelists here today, is this is the right time for you in your organization to take a look at your organization, take a look at your processes, and especially take a look at your supply chain, right? And if there's one question you want to even ask yourself, even at this point, is who in my organization needs to be the point person? If it's to read the regulations first, right? If you've already done that, great. But if that is the case, who is this point person in my organization to understand the regulations, take a look at your processes, take a look at your supply chain. If you're working with brokers, if you're working with traders, we've talked about closing the loop on some of these businesses that until now, until the passing of this new rule, did not need to be certified. These businesses will need to be certified. So the big question is, do I have any of these businesses within my supply chain that I need to communicate with? What do they need to know, and what do they need to meet when it comes to the requirements of the rule? Okay, so kind of first messaging, and it does reinforce, I think, what everyone on the panel is saying today is, it's time to ask the question, who in my organization, what in my organization, what in my processes and businesses needs to know this rule, and what they need to comply with when it comes to the rule. I think the second thing that I do want to share of that as part of the questions would really be, on top of that, it's not only the communication, ultimately then who needs to be certified, right? And for many of you who are in this room certified organic, congratulations for making it through the process. Congratulations, and I also want to express my appreciation for your ongoing dedication to maintain the integrity of our program. As many of us have voiced on the panel, your commitment the work you put, the effort you put into what you do in your organic practices is clearly a demonstration of what the value of the seal, and it's all the value of the seal. It's all the value of the seal that we're all here to protect and we're here to maintain. So real question is, yes, who then in the supply chain needs to be certified, right? And I would encourage you to work with your organic certifier. We have a few here present in the room. Work with them, communicate with, again, going to emphasize communication again, communicate with them, work with them to see what, again, is the requirements and what needs to be certified within your supply chain. Again, emphasize brokers, traders, and potentially any importers that are part of that supply chain. The final thing I just want to share is, the National Organic Program, my division is responsible for conducting audits of the certifiers. We're also very busy ourselves taking a look at our own internal processes, taking a look at our own internal procedures, establishing point persons within all our divisions across the program, because we also need to take a look at ourselves with the new authorities that the rule has given us. We have to update our processes too. We have to update our policies too. We have to update our procedures. And so we're also very busy doing that. We also share in that effort, right? We are part of the standards development process, but we all are also the ones that need to implement it. And so what we're currently looking to when it comes to planning to ensure that whether you're a producer, whether you're a certifier, whoever you are, if you're part of that supply chain, that you have the tools that you need to better understand the regulations, to be able to comply. That's where we're placing a lot of our efforts on these days. So we're planning webinars. We do have an online organic learning center, if some of you are familiar with that. And we're planning to build more modules to make sure that folks have all the tools they need to better understand the regulations and to be able to comply with them. The other things that we're doing, and Connie mentioned that too, is we're looking to work more closely with the Accredited Certifiers Association. Got great working groups. We've worked over the past year on the import certificate system. It's going to be an online system, and we wanted to make sure that it would meet the practical needs of the certifiers who have different types of electronic systems and databases already in place. So that has been an ongoing working group. One of the things that's not part of today's discussion, but the transition that occurred in India, we had a very close working group that worked with multiple certifiers all over the world as part of that oversight collaboration. And so we're going to continue doing that. We're going to work closely with the certifiers, and we'll work closely with our internal team to make sure that there are training modules, that webinars are going to be in place as soon as this rule is published and we're ready for implementation. Okay, so I think just final messaging again is communication. Communication between the program to certifiers, communication from certifiers to their certified operations, and for everyone that's a certified operation in this group, same thing, communication with your internal staff, communication with everyone external that you work with that are going to be impacted by this rule. It is high time, and we are very close to the cusp of that rule being published.
Thank you, Robert. Well done on the weeks versus months. Like that, I know that's like from a government revelation standpoint, that's pretty juicy. That's pretty progressive there. So I appreciate you going that far. That's pretty exciting for me because we've been, one of the things we do at Wolf & Associates is kind of monitor these things over time. So it takes a lot of dogged persistence to just track this stuff. So Robert mentioned the origins of this formally go back to 2020. But the individual components that are now labeled under SOE, or Strengthening Organic Enforcement, the individual components of that go back a decade. And I know that, for example, the changes to currently excluded operations, handlers, traders, brokers. The first discussion I remember, that was 2011. And I was on NOSB at the time. And that was big conversation I had with the current deputy administrator's predecessor. Because I had spent so much time doing inspections, I'd seen a lot of, let's call them questionable practices about in and around broker activity. Uncertified broker activity, which is brokers are excluded. There's a method through which they can be excluded from the mandate of certification. And so that was one thing I really focused on 11 years ago. And SOE was never a term at that point. But the core issues, all of these issues that have been discussed here, import certificates, right? Changes in excluded operations, for example, those have all been, there have been tendrils of that for a decade at least. This SOE unifies all of those tendrils into one spot. That's why it's such a big change, because these bits and pieces that we've been tracking for decade at least, all are coming together into one nicely definable package. And excuse me, so that package is in part what the trade association needs to present, right? Organic Trade Association now is the kind of, I mentioned Tom batting cleanup here, but the trade association needs to be mindful of all of these components: growers, certifiers, regulation, advocacy, input, and all of those have a home at the Organic Trade Association. That's why I asked Tom to kind of wrap this up, bring it home for us, is that OTA has to have a window on all of these activities, be reasonably knowledgeable in all of the challenges for all of those sectors, and make sure that the common communication is one that supports the messaging that the seal has integrity. Here's all of the procedures, here's all the constituents. It takes a lot of work, as you all know, better than anyone, how much work it takes to get food into people's mouths, right? No one knows better than the people than you all in this room. And most consumers, bless them, don't understand how much work that takes. And it is one part of the job of OTA to tie all that together in a consistent message, to make sure that consumers know what they're getting, know the value they're getting, that all of you in this room work really, really hard to make happen. So with that, I'd like to ask Tom to kind of wrap this up, wrap up the panel. We'll have quite a bit of time to field some questions. So start those questions a little percolating in your head, and then we'll pick that up as soon as Tom finishes up.
Yeah, thank you, John. And just so you all know, Robert here told me that he would give everyone in this room $1 for every day that the rule waits more than weeks. So make sure you sign up with Robert here.
I didn't
Just
hear that.
joking aside.
I didn't hear that,
That's a
actually.
joke.
I didn't hear that either.
Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, Tom Chapman, CEO of the Organic Trade Association. Really happy to be here. I'm going to talk. We heard a lot about the specifics of how this is going to impact operations. I'm going to take a step back from that, kind of go a route that Jake did, and talk a little bit more about the why. Like, why is this important? Why are we talking about this? Why are you going to have to do all of these activities? And part of it is because of our success. I mean, a large part of it is because of the success. We talked about, Emily started off with, who remembers 2002? I mean, I had a really sweet flip phone at the time that I thought was like great cutting edge technology. And if you're seen walking around with a flip phone now, I know there's folks out here that probably have flip phones, but it's just not the same as what it was. Technology has moved quite a far ways in that time period. And when you look at the organic standards, it hasn't. The standards haven't changed, but the market has, right? The market is $63 billion. And when I started in this, I started around 2002. I had wild dreams for organic. $63 billion wasn't part of that wild dream. That's beyond it. And so, that is part of why we're dealing with this issue today, is our own success. The other issue is the premium, right? That's a great thing. That's why all y'all are in this room, is because organic is value added at the farm. And what that means is because the value happens there, that's where the premium should start as well. But all of that together makes organic really attractive for bad actors, right? You get more of a reward if you work in that space, and it's fast growing, and it's big, it's successful. It's a great place for bad actors. And so that's why this is important. And this is not esoteric, right? There's events that have occurred. 2011, the fertilizer fraud issues here in California. 2016-17, there was a bunch of Black Sea imports and grain fraud going on that got Washington Post attentions. 2021, cotton fraud again, like out there in the press. And so all of these issues, these were all punches that the organic brand took. They were bad, but they could have been much, much worse. And so that's why when we talk integrity over and over again, it's because it really matters. I'm going to take a step back and talk a little bit about OTA. OTA is a membership-based organization, and we work on behalf of our members. So our members come to us and tell us what their priorities are and where we should be working. And when these issues were going on, dating back to 2011, they were coming to us and saying, hey, we need to work more on integrity. Integrity is important. And so that's what we did. And it's important to know that, and Jake talked about this too, integrity matters, and Robert, integrity matters for everybody. You're probably sitting in this room saying, I do all the right things already. Why do I have these other requirements that are going to be put on me? This is someone else's problem. And it's true it's someone else's problem, but it's also yours because we're under this common brand. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about why it's important, right? You've heard this from other people, but organic is based on trust, right? To get that value add premium back to that farmer, a consumer has to be willing to pay that premium. And they're only going to pay that premium if they trust that brand and that label. And so it's really important to maintain that trust because trust, once lost, is hard to regain. So trust is important. We have to keep that top of mind. And organic is a brand, right? It's a seal out there that consumers are looking for. It's an information shortcut for them to know that these products are meeting the value attributes they're looking for, right? It's all those practices you're doing in the field, all of those additional labor that you take on, the more expensive inputs that you use, all that matters, and that's held through in that seal. And so we need to keep in mind that brand is very important. It needs to stay valued and trusted. The other point that's quite large here is this is not just produce, right? I'm talking to produce here, but this brand and this seal extends beyond just the produce sector. It's used across the board. It's on Robert's lapel over here, but it's on cotton, right? It's on textile fabrics. It's on consumer product goods. It's on grain. It's on meat. It's on dairy. It's everywhere. It's on hand sanitizers. So it's every sector across the board that's something that's agricultural. And so fraud in any one of these areas, even if it's not prevalent in produce, impacts produce, right? Produce is the largest section of organic. It's 15% of the marketplace. Again, getting back to our success, who expected that? But fraud on the grain side, fraud on the cotton side still impacts produce as well. So when we look at these rules and these changes, it needs to apply globally to all these production systems, and it needs to keep that brand integrity across the board. Because once a consumer loses trust in the organic seal because of cotton, they might lose it for produce as well, right? It's the same seal, it's the same brand. It cross-cuts these areas. So how did we get here? Well, this fraud was going on. Our members were asking us to take action, and we did a couple of things. One thing is we created our own voluntary program for fraud prevention. It's education, it's resources on how you put together a fraud prevention plan, how to assess risk in your supply chain, up and down the chain. There's educational materials out there. We worked with the NOP on it and others. We have trusted advisors like Wolf and Associates here. And so that's a voluntary program. It's an excellent resource out there. It's actually free to most aspects of it. So I encourage folks that are looking around for resources, that's a good place to start or come talk to us. But that's also a voluntary program. So it helps the good actors get better. It helps them find problems in their supply chains. It's not going to help get rid of a bad actor, right, in that space. So more need to get done. So what happened next? We talked a little bit about a farm bill, 2018 farm bill. Worked really hard with coalition partners and our members to get the NOP the appropriate authority and enforcement activity, enforcement and resourcing needed to start, taking action and maintaining the integrity of the seal. And so I'm going to come back to this a couple times, but farm bill, it's important. It's how we move things forward, and it matters. I'm bringing it up because 2023, next year, is a farm bill year. And so as much as this is moving us forward to protect that seal, it's going to be important for us to all think about what's next, how we need to keep moving growing this marketplace. And so it's going to be important for us to start engaging in that again. But sticking on the fraud end, additional authorities, additional resources, and a mandate to close loopholes. That's where we talked a little bit about the National Organic Standards Board. We like our NOSB, we like our acronyms here. It's the advisory board to the USDA. It's made up of the community. So there's grower seats, there's handler seats, there's a certifier, there's environmentalists. It's a whole range. I'm counting just a few of them. They make the recommendations. They've been making recommendations for all these years. We worked, OTA constantly provides comments to them to try to represent the industry needs. Each of these issues come up when we think through fraud, and as these rules get proposed and they move forward, mitigating fraud is the goal, but it comes with trade-offs, right? It comes with costs. Connie talked about costs that certifiers are going to incur. That rolls downhill to the operations that are going to have to pay for those costs. There's trade-offs here. It's always important as these rules come out, and even in this process now, it's still going to be important because there's still going to be unknowns as this rule comes out. It's important to provide that feedback because we're looking for that right trade-off, right? That maintains the integrity, but doesn't cause overly due burden, right? Overly costly solutions. Those both need to be in balance to make sure that the businesses grow, but the brand is protected. So that's where we come in, that's where we're working, and that's hopefully where this rule is going to come out. I've been really impressed with the USDA and what they've been doing in this space, and it's been a lot of active participation in providing comments and getting this forward. So I'm going to wrap up with a little bit about just, this, as much as I don't know where the crowd is sitting, it's hard for me to read right now at 9 a.m. in the morning. But you're either probably sitting there a little bit, annoyed about the new rules that are coming your way. You might be excited about, you might be excited and happy about it because the solutions it's going to bring in the fraud area. But it does speak to what I think is great about this community, what John kind of started about, is our collective action is what got us here. And we are stronger together than we are separately. And this is a positive change, right? This is protecting the brand that we all care about, that we've based our businesses on. And we need to protect that brand to continue to grow it. So the positive collective action that came out of this is great. And this comes back to the, it's a farm bill year. So make sure you're prepared for this rule. Make sure you're prepared for speaking to your representatives and your trade associations. There's a bunch of us here. We're the Organic Trade Association. I see IFPA here. You have CCOF here. Western Growers sponsored this place. We're all here to make us stronger together, right? To go represent the interests of this room in DC. Make sure that you're communicating with them, what's going to happen next, where you need help later on, because now is the time to keep doing that so we keep this positive change, this positive collective action going in the future. We'll stop there.
Well, nicely put.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. Before we go to questions, I want to just plant this seed before we end the session, about 15 minutes. I want to ask each of the panelists to be thinking, if they're one sentence answer to this question, what is your number one suggestion to the audience? We'll hit that right before we leave. One sentence. It can be a compound sentence, okay? But one sentence, okay? So, clarifying question?
I got a question I'm not going to add there, but I'm going to throw it on here because I meant to say it and I just realized I forgot it. We talk a lot about supply chains. You heard that over and over again of making sure your supply chain is certified. When I think of supply chain, my background is supply chain, I think upstream, right? So everyone who's coming into my building. Also think about who you're selling to, because this is the Grower Summit, right? And so you're selling to folks. Think about your customers. Your customer may need to be certified, and they may not be certified today. So think through that piece. Think up and down your supply chain. Just, you're somewhere in the middle. But just make sure that you're thinking the upside too, because the last thing we want this rule to happen is make it so you can't sell to your customer. So make sure that they're aware of the rule as well if they're uncertified.
Thank you. Good clarification. And that kind of speaks to the intention of this. The intention of this is for you to be informed and just a little bit nervous, right? Hopefully not overwhelmingly nervous. The intent here was to show that there are lots of knowledgeable people about every aspect of this regulation that's coming, and that you have options. Those in this room will be among the first to realize the gravity of the situation, right? This is not doom and gloom. This is a place where hope springs, because knowledge brings hope, right? Something I actually learned from many of you in the audience, actually, many years ago, is that with knowledge comes the ability to affect change, in this case, positive change for the industry. So hopefully there's a couple of questions, one or two out there in the audience. Instead of me doing who remembers Phil Donahue, the old talk show host? Yeah, I'm not that guy. I'm not going to go run out and put the mic in front of you like that. But I will repeat the question for y'all, okay? Yes, ma'am, blue sweatshirt.
I have a question about the ACE system and how we get set up with that.
The which system?
ACE.
ACE system. The question is, how does one get set up in the ACE system? Anyone can help? Any panelists can help with that?
I can take a stab at it if you
Okay.
want in my background. So what role do you play in the supply chain? Can I ask that? Because you're a handler.
Handler.
Importer, exporter, or? Okay.
Import,
Okay.
export.
So, I mean, this applies to the import side as far as I understand it. The final rule, which we haven't seen, right, this gets to that, like, magic of the final rule. That's what we need to see. But as I understand it, basically, I mean, the ACE system and access into that's basically, you know, held by a class of folks called customs brokers, right? They're the ones that you interact with to get your products through borders. This is all import facing, so this is not going to impact, as far as I know, Robert can correct me, like exports of U.S. products abroad. This is not going to bring you into that issues there. But on the import side, as you're looking to bring stuff in, your customs broker is who's going to be entering that into the system, and then it's the certifier, the importer, who's going to have to do a lot of the work to get that import certificate that you request in your import process. So it's going to be another document along with a slew of documents, right, that you need to do for importing already. What I understand from the system and my own conversations with the program is that, you know, they are maximizing this program to try to reduce the burden it takes while making sure that, you know, there's some check to make sure there's that the products are truly organic, certified, and there's a cert to it. So don't think of it, I think, in terms of like a piece of paper that gets added to this. Is more of a systematic check that's going to be very much based on the control systems of your certifier. So as this rule comes out, I think I would worry less about ACE. That's more your customs brokers, like the mechanics of how it gets done. I would worry more about the certifier of your of who you're importing and having direct conversations about how they're going to handle import certificate issuance. That's really where you're going to want to focus.
Thank you, Tom. Next question.
Good morning, everybody. I'm a crop farmer in Colorado, and it looks to me like maybe a question for Robert. When we talk about the grower and what they're going to have to do and the handler and everything else, have you given any thought of how we're going to increase the inspectors and certifiers to be able to get through this process? It looks like there might be a human shortage or human capital shortage right now. Has there been any thought on how we're going to help those certifiers and inspectors maybe make more money, get more excitement into the industry, that side of the industry?
Thank you. There are inspectors everywhere cheering you right now across the country. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, first of all, I know for a fact that it's been an ongoing question. It's not just with strengthening organic enforcement and the requirements that are going to lead to more inspections and more certified operations. From the program, we have been working on what we call a human capital initiative. It has been going on. I don't have all the details. Maybe after the session, if you'd like to get more information, I can put you in contact with the folks at the program who are overseeing that part of what we do at the NOP. But we do have a human capital initiative that is focusing particularly on that, making sure that there is sufficient resources, not only when it comes to inspectors, but also resources at the certifier level, right? We're not just talking about inspectors. More inspections lead to more reviews, and there is definitely going to be an ongoing need for not just even current staff, but just an ongoing need for staff to join the certification force too. So short answer is yes, we do have some initiatives in place, and we're working with organizations to make sure that there is an ongoing flow of resources moving forward.
Next question in the back.
I don't need a microphone. I'm a horribly loud voice.
Go ahead.
John, quickie. Mine's more of a comment than a question. Is that okay, or do you?
It's okay. Is it a sentence
Okay.
or so?
Quick background. My name is Ron. I have been in the organic community for 35 years, acting as a professional for over 25, and Tom and I actually have a shared past in previous lives. Comment. So I'm going to go back to a few of the original statements that the grassroots movement of the organic community was just that, and originally it was self-policing, and prior to the NOP, self-policing was all we had, and in a strange way, it actually worked relatively good, and here's why it worked good. It worked good because the self-policing occurred in those specific production communities. If you were in dry edible beans, boom. If you were in row crops, boom. Those were the people turning you in. Those were the people filing the complaints. My comment, and I want to try to make it as succinct as possible, and it's really to Jake's point, but obviously to the whole panel. We're in an environment now where the NOP doesn't quite have the teeth to really really chew on the potential fraud that's out there, and we all know there are bad actors out there. And Jake specifically called out, look, it's kind of on you. Hire PIs, hire investigators. There have been multiple cases where in the organic community people have gone after bad actors and in turn lost years of their lives and lawsuits and money, et cetera, et cetera. So I'll wrap it up and say the comment is this, that there's going back to the origin of the organic industry, there is an answer inside of that, and that is that the people that know best about row crops are the people that are farming and handling and processing row crops. And the people that know best about dry edible beans and cereal grains are on the ground in the Midwest. The people that know the most about permanent crops, stone fruit, almonds, walnuts, they're in those communities. And somehow to really get the depth and the breadth of the enforcement, we have to somehow go back to that, because Jake, you're 100% right, but how can a handler or a farmer say I'm going to incur $250,000 in a PI and a lawsuit when I'm just trying to run a business? Mm-hmm. So thank you, and I know that was lengthy, but I appreciate everybody's patience.
Thanks for the comment. I do remember those days, actually, before NOP, and sitting, making decisions about our Central Coast chapter at CCUF is where I started. On the review side, and I remember that. It was neighbor inspecting neighbor and neighbor reviewing neighbor. I will also note that some very adept inspectors have now been acquired by the NOP, actually. Some people from that era are in the NOP, and it can't be everyone, can't be everywhere. But I've noticed a significant uptick in seasoned veterans in compliance and enforcement. So I agree with what you're saying. It will take the community as a whole. It'll take a little bit, everyone doing the best they can to add their two cents to making positive change. Thank you for bringing back those memories, actually. Those are some of my favorite memories. I got the high sign from the organizers. We have about 4 more minutes, so I'd love to hit the number one take-home message from each, take-home sentence from each of the panelists, and then we'll wrap it up. Emily, would you start?
Sure. And just quickly before my take-home, one thing I forgot to mention about import certificates is that there is a cost associated with each NOP import certificate. So if you import a lot, check that out with your certifier now, because you may need to be budgeting. So that is a very important piece. NOP import certificate, there is a cost per certificate. Just forgot to mention that. Okay, my take-home message, it's going to be about a sentence, a little bit of a compound sentence, but what came to mind for me is actually, I'm a big Golden State Warriors fan. But what came to mind when I went to a game is I got a t-shirt, and this is kind of what Tom and others have said when I went to a game, that says strength in numbers. And I really think that applies to the industry, but more specifically to your company. Communicate within each other, strengthen numbers, reach out. If you don't know about transportation, if you need help in your supply chain, if you need someone help with labeling, your policy wonk, you're not going to be able to do it all yourself. So strength in numbers, within your own organization. That would be my
Okay.
messaging.
Very good. Connie?
All right, I just can't resist. I need to follow up on one thing from that last comment, if
All right,
I
okay.
can.
Okay. Keep it quick.
And there was there was part of that in something you said there, Ron, about the NOP not having the teeth. And I just wanted to express that organic is the only eco-label that has the teeth needed.
go.
It is the only one where you're going to see a person with jail time. It's the only one that you're going to see civil penalties issued for fraudulent action. You're not going to see somebody in jail for misclaiming regenerative. You're not going to see somebody with a $100,000 fine for claiming sustainable when it wasn't. You will in organic, and that's what I think was important, is it does have the teeth. So my piece of parting advice would be I'm gonna just keep it positive and light. Don't panic. We're keeping it organic.
All right. Very good.
How's that?
Perfect. Jake, sentence?
Well, I thank Ron for his comment. I'm very aligned. I think for me, we're in this together as a community. It's hard if you're one person, and I agree with Ron 100%. For one person to fight the fight it's a brutal fight to be fought, and it's years. But we're in as a community, and we've got to protect our value. We've got to be proactive to protect our value. We cannot be devalued.
All right. Thank you, sir.
I
Robert?
think just one thing I also wanted to add about the teeth. We do have many more teeth within the program. And just, you had asked earlier, I just didn't have an opportunity back then, but with our compliance enforcement division, which is a separate division, we do have separate surveillance teams, especially for livestock at this point and also for imports. So definitely the teeth are using the powers that we have, and we are definitely seeing action happening. So stay tuned to what you will see going out there in the marketplace. My statement will be a common goal. I would say our common goal is to protect integrity, and let's bolster consumer confidence in the seal.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Tom, last words.
I can't not, pass on making another comment to Ron's comment. So
I've lost control.
we love it. We lost control, right? Well, I mean, this is a plug for what I plugged already. But it's a Farm Bill year, Ron, 2023. And if we need to give the NOP more teeth, let's talk about it. Talk to whoever, whatever trade association you prefer to sit in and work with. Talk to them about the need for this, so we can take common action in DC to make sure that they have the teeth they need if they don't have them already. And then to wrap up my one sentence now, to bring it home, I was an Eagle Scout. My son's a Cub Scout, and the motto right now is just ringing in my ears: be prepared. Right?
Right.
Be prepared. So find those resources out there for you. Talk to your certifiers, talk to your trade associations, talk to consultants. Look out on the interwebs, go to the Learning Center. NOP, I'm sure, is going to put out great stuff too. Just talk, find it out, and get prepared. Don't wait till the last minute.
Thank you all for coming. Thanks for your indulgence these last few minutes here. Appreciate the panelists. Thank you very much.